I used to own every hallway of this house. Now, they call it my wing, as if I'm some aging guest tucked away for pity's sake. They stripped the drapes from my windows years ago, said I needed sunlight to boost my mood, but I know why they really did it. Without the curtains, there's no privacy. No secrets. Just me, exposed to the sun and to them, as they march past with lawyers and whispered smirks. It's funny how quickly you can go from mother to nuisance. My name is Evelina Carrington. Once, they toasted my name in every ballroom from London to Vienna. Now my meals arrive on cold trays delivered by staff who avoid eye contact. My son, Sebastian, stopped calling me mother 3 winters ago. Now it's just Evelina, said with the same tone he uses for the housekeeper. But I'm not as frail as I seem. I spend my days listening. The walls here aren't as thick as they think. I know about the offshore account. I know about the renovations that drained the trust. I know that Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, wears my old diamond brooch and claims it as her own. And I know that neither of them realize I'm still a trustee in name, even if they forged the paperwork that said otherwise. They think I'm docile, broken, a ghost clinging to roses and memories. But ghosts see everything. And ghosts remember. This house has always belonged to me. And soon, it will again. The house creaks when it rains. Most people find it eerie, but I've learned to listen to it like a language. Each groan of wood and whisper of wind carries meaning. I know when Vanessa tiptoes down to the wine cellar in the middle of the night, thinking no one sees her decanting bottles she claims were lost in transport. I know when Sebastian slams his study door out of frustration after speaking with investors he's been lying to. They think I'm locked away in here, deaf and done. But I've found the gaps in the wallpaper. Behind the old vanity mirror in my room, there's a tiny hole, something left from an old electrical panel. It's not much, but it gives me a sliver of sound from the adjoining hallway. That's how I learned about Project Carrington Renewal. That's what they're calling the full sale of the manor and its land to a foreign development firm. They plan to bulldoze the stables, the orchard, the chapel where I buried my husband. They will not destroy this house. Not while I'm breathing. There's a journal I keep under the false floorboard near the hearth. It holds dates, names, whispers. I write in it every night after pretending to drift off during my evening tea. Even that's a performance now. They drug it lightly. I recognized the taste of valerian and something stronger the first week. So I switched cups with the potted ficus near the fireplace when no one was watching. They don't know what I remember. They don't know who I've written to. They don't know that beneath this manor sleeps a secret even they couldn't inherit. And when it wakes, they will. There was a time when Sebastian would come to me for everything: schoolyard injuries, failed romances, even the day he lost his job at the bank. He cried in this very room, in that armchair near the fireplace, while I stroked his hair and told him he'd rise again. And he did, but not with honor, not with decency. He rose on the backs of others, on mine. After Richard, my husband, died, I made a mistake. I trusted our son. I thought keeping the estate under his name would be easier, cleaner, for taxes, appearances. I signed papers I didn't read. I let my grief write my signature. And they took everything. Now, in the stillness of this wretched morning, I hold a letter I wrote a year ago. It's addressed to Hugo Bellamy, Richard's former solicitor. The kind of man who once knew how to untangle even the most deceptive legal webs. I never posted it because I feared I'd be intercepted. But something has changed. Yesterday, Vanessa slipped. She mentioned an inspection, just to assess property value, she said. But I know an appraiser's visit when I hear it. The Carrington estate is officially for sale. So, I unfolded the letter. Read it one last time. Then, when the nurse stepped out to check on the second floor linen leak, I tucked it into the hollow cane I keep beside my chair. It's more than just a walking stick. Richard gave it to me on our 50th anniversary. It unscrews at the base, hollow enough for documents. I plan to walk in the garden tomorrow. There's a groundskeeper, Noel. Young, kind. His grandmother once worked here during my youth. He tends the roses like they're sacred. I've seen the way he watches me, like he remembers who I was. If I can reach him, if I can pass him the letter, the war will begin. Quietly, like thunder before the storm. The morning air carried the sharp bite of early spring, cold enough to numb fingers, but fragrant with the promise of bloom. I requested a walk in the rose garden. Vanessa approved with a patronizing smile, likely thinking I'd enjoy a final glimpse before bulldozers came for the land. I wore my old wool coat, the one with the tarnished silver buttons, and carried the cane like always. No one questioned it. No one ever does anymore. They've grown too used to my silence, too comfortable believing in the illusion they created, that I'm too old, too tired, too defeated to fight. But I still know how to play a role. Noel was trimming a hedgerow when I reached the fountain. I paused there, pretending to catch my breath. He saw me, hesitated, then approached, wiping dirt-stained gloves on his trousers. His eyes flicked briefly to my cane, then to my face. "Mrs. Carrington," he said gently. "Would you like me to fetch a chair?" I shook my head. My voice cracked from disuse, but I forced it out. "I need you to take something." Quietly. No one must see. He blinked, startled perhaps more by my voice than the request. I leaned in as if whispering about flowers and slid the hollow cane into his hands, twisting the base open just enough to show the folded letter inside. "Deliver this to Hugo Bellamy. His office is still on Norwood Street. Do it today." "Say nothing." His brows furrowed with concern, but he nodded slowly. I saw the moment his memory caught up with him, his grandmother's stories of the lady of the house, the one who kept order when men failed. I turned away before tears could betray me. By dinner, the cane was back at my door, empty. Noel had done it. The silence at the table that night was unbearable. Vanessa chatted idly about yacht clubs and gala invites, not realizing the noose was already being woven loop by loop behind her back. The first shot had been fired, and they hadn't even heard it. The Carrington study was once my sanctuary. Richard and I designed it together. Dark wood, warm lamplight, books that smelled of tobacco and old ambition. Now it's Sebastian's war room, where he plots his rise and counts his inheritance before it's even ripe. He keeps the door locked. He thinks I've forgotten the passcode. But I built that room. Yesterday, while the house was distracted by a leaking pipe on the third floor, I made my move. Noel, bless his soul, created a diversion with the plumber while I slipped into the corridor unnoticed. My fingers trembled as I reached for the keypad. 12/17, our wedding anniversary. The lock clicked. It was the first time I'd stepped into that room in over 4 years. Dust had no place here. Sebastian keeps it surgically neat. The fireplace was unlit. Papers lined the desk, neatly stacked, clipped and stamped. The Carrington estate sale agreement sat right there, bold and arrogant. Pending approval from sole acting owner, Sebastian Carrington. Sole owner. I smiled. Then I opened the grandfather clock. Behind the gears and brass pendulum lies a hidden compartment. Richard installed it when paranoia overtook discretion. He believed that power and security could live in the same breath. Inside it, still sealed in a leather pouch, were the original deeds, notarized copies, and our real will, my will, the one Sebastian never knew about. The one that still names me as executor and majority owner of the Carrington assets. I took it all, slipped it into the lining of my coat, and closed the clock like it had never been disturbed. By the time Vanessa noticed me wandering the corridor again, I was humming an old tune, the kind she believes senile women favor. Let her think I've gone soft. Let them both think that. Because what I hold now isn't just paper. It's a sword. And I'm done waiting. Dinner that evening was an extravagant lie. Crystal glasses, white linen, a roast flown in from France, Vanessa's attempt to impress a business associate from overseas. She called it a celebratory supper, and I, of course, was invited only because she likes to parade me like a relic. The harmless, withering matriarch. A prop. But I accepted. And I dressed like Evelina Carrington. Pearls. Lipstick. The same emerald brooch Richard gave me the night we closed the first Carrington Gallery deal in Milan. I caught Vanessa eyeing it as I entered the dining room. Her smile faltered just slightly, the edge of something sharp beneath her otherwise polished mask. Sebastian looked up from his wine, surprised to see me. "Mother," he said cautiously, "you're dressed." I smiled back. It felt like a night worth remembering. The guest, some Dutch venture capitalist with a brash laugh and no sense of subtlety, barely acknowledged me beyond a curt nod. They spoke of property transfers, tax shields, legacy auctions, things they believed I no longer had the power or wit to understand. But I sipped slowly, listened, noted names. Mentions of a Swiss holding account, a silent partner. Plans to sell off the Whitmore paintings in the West Gallery, my paintings. My legacy. And then, at Vanessa's prompting, they toasted. "To the future," she said, raising her glass. To Carrington's success and shedding the past like a heavy coat. There it was. Their poison, gift wrapped in charm. I raised my glass too. "To the past," I said softly. "It tends to outlive us all." The room stilled for a breath. Then Sebastian chuckled awkwardly and the conversation moved on. But Vanessa looked at me longer than she should have. She suspects something. Good. Because the past they think they've buried? It's clawing its way back to the surface. And I'm holding the shovel. In every house this old, there are layers of dust, of paint, of secrets. And if you've lived in it long enough, you learn where the cracks form first. The west corridor, behind the tapestry of St. Cecilia, hides a narrow service stairwell that connects the upper bedrooms to the original cellar. It was sealed decades ago after Richard modernized the place, but I always kept the key. No one thought to take it from me. They assumed I'd forgotten what it opened. But I hadn't. Late that night, when the house slipped into its unnatural hush, I moved. The key was cold in my hand, but it slid into the old iron lock like it never left. The door groaned open, revealing stairs that smelled of stone and memory. I took a lantern and descended into the dark. The cellar is no longer used for wine. Vanessa had it cleared out to store imported chairs and outdated dinnerware she didn't want the staff to see. But behind the false wall, through a hidden panel Richard installed back when taxes were more of a negotiation, I found it. The old servant's ledger. Handwritten. Ink faded. Pages stiff with age. Every member of staff since the 1950s documented. But what I was looking for wasn't just names. I was searching for loyalty. And I found it. Elsa Tremaine. Had maid for 41 years. Her granddaughter, Mira, now works at the downtown notary's office. Thomas Hill, the footman who once overheard Richard's entire succession plan, his son, Jonas, became a private investigator in the city. I marked the names, folded the pages. I no longer had time for guesses. I needed people who remembered who I was, who would understand the stakes. I would reach out through Noel. Quietly, carefully. This wasn't just about the estate anymore. It was about reputation, legacy, blood. Sebastian and Vanessa had stolen from me. Now, I would steal something from them. Control. Revenge isn't always a roar. Sometimes, it's a whisper passed behind manicured hedges, a glance exchanged in the market square, a folded note slipped between the pages of a garden journal. Noel had taken my list without question. He didn't ask why I needed the names or what I intended. He simply nodded once, his silence more loyal than any vow. A week later, the responses began trickling in. The first came in the form of a pressed white envelope hidden under the rosebush near the sundial. Inside was a letter from Mira Tremaine, written in careful, restrained script. She remembered her grandmother's stories. She remembered me. And she was willing to help. 2 days later, Jonas Hill left a calling card tucked beneath a bouquet of calla lilies that appeared mysteriously in my room. There was no message, just his name, number, and a single word inked on the back, listening. The web was spinning, and not a soul inside this house knew. Meanwhile, Vanessa had taken to redecorating the East drawing room. She called it modernizing the legacy, but I knew what it really was: erasure. She replaced Richard's portrait with some minimalist nonsense, black squares on white canvas that meant nothing to anyone. But I kept my poise. I smiled at her over tea, complimented her dreadful taste in upholstery, and thanked her for letting me stretch my legs in the garden more often. She was proud of her mercy, delighted to see me play the part. Little did she know that every stroll I took now meant another message sent, another piece of the plan falling into place. And when I passed Noel this morning, he murmured 4 words beneath his breath without breaking stride: "Bellamy has the documents." My heart skipped, but I said nothing, just kept walking, slow and deliberate. Because while they were busy selling off my past, I was rewriting the future. And they would never see the ending coming. Rain returned to the manor like an old guest, familiar, steady, and always accompanied by silence. It hammered the stained glass, ran in rivulets down the stone lions guarding the courtyard, and muted every step within the house. But inside me, the storm had already passed. I had everything I needed: the original will, the deed, witness statements from former staff, even proof that Sebastian had siphoned estate funds into a foreign bank account under a shell company listed in Vanessa's maiden name. Jonas uncovered it all in less than a week. Apparently, deceit runs thin when you've lived your whole life on the surface. I just needed one more thing, a moment. A public one. That morning, Vanessa announced we would be hosting an estate transition gala. The irony nearly made me laugh. She claimed it was a charity event to honor the Carrington legacy, but in truth, it was a grand unveiling of their takeover, a final humiliation to parade me as the frail old woman being gently ushered into irrelevance. Perfect. I insisted on attending. Vanessa agreed too quickly, her voice coated in honey. "Of course, Evelina. We'll get you something appropriate to wear." She had no idea I still kept the gown from the 1987 Heritage Ball, the sapphire silk one Richard adored. It still fit, though my bones felt heavier now, not with age, but with purpose. Noel had the guest list by dusk. Mira secured a notary. Jonas arranged for 2 quiet journalists from a reputable outlet. And as I stood at my window that night, listening to the rain, I allowed myself something rare. A smile. Not of victory, not yet, but of certainty. Because they planned to end my legacy on their terms. But what they didn't realize is, I was the legacy. And on the night of their celebration, I would rise from the ashes they poured around me. One toast at a time. The Carrington ballroom hadn't glittered like this in years. Polished chandeliers swayed with the hush of violin strings, and servers in crisp uniforms glided across marble like dancers. Vanessa stood at the entrance, lips red, dress gold, flashing smiles like daggers. Sebastian clung to her side like a shadow desperate for light. I entered last. Every guest turned as I walked through the grand archway in the sapphire gown they'd all thought lost to moths and memory. The hem swept the floor like a declaration. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but I kept my chin high and my pace slow. Vanessa's smile froze mid-sip. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. I let them look. Let them calculate. Let them realize, far too late, that I wasn't there to be honored. I was there to end them. They began the speeches soon after. Vanessa took the stage first, faux gracious and glowing. "We are gathered here tonight," she said, "to celebrate not only the Carrington legacy, but its transition into a modern era, an era of vision, of renewal, of elegant change." Her words dripped with charm, but her eyes flicked to me once, just once, and in them I saw the question: what is she planning? Then Sebastian spoke. He talked of growth, responsibility, new leadership. Never once did he say my name. That was his final mistake. I stepped forward. Murmurs spread like fire through dry brush. Vanessa's eyes widened. Sebastian looked to the MC in panic. But I was already at the podium. I wasn't scheduled to speak. I began softly, my voice filling the chamber like smoke. But I felt it was time to reclaim something that was taken. A hush fell. I raised a single sheet of paper, my original will, and another, the deed. I am Evelina Carrington, founder of the Whitmore Gallery Trust, executor of the Carrington estate, and tonight I reclaim what was stolen. Jonas, seated quietly near the press table, nodded once. Noel, from the far wall, locked the ballroom doors. Mira, in a navy suit, stepped up with a notary seal. And the crowd erupted, not in applause, but in whispers, gasps, and the staccato shudder of cameras. Vanessa took a step forward, rage blooming across her face. "This is absurd." "No," I said, calm as winter. "What's absurd is thinking a legacy can be stolen while its heart still beats." I turned toward the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, you came to celebrate a transition. So, let me give you one." And with that, I signed the document right there on the podium, restoring full ownership of the estate and assets to myself, and freezing the illegal transfers Sebastian had tried to hide. The storm had arrived, and I stood at its center, unshaken. The moment the ink dried on that signature, silence spread through the room like fog. A dense, paralyzing quiet that even the clinking glasses and half-swallowed gasps couldn't pierce. Everyone stared, some in awe, some in disbelief, but most with the same expression. They had just witnessed something irreversible. Sebastian looked pale. His hand twitched as if it still held the microphone, as though he could take back everything I'd said if only he spoke fast enough. But no words came. He was drowning in a sea he once thought he controlled. Vanessa's hands were clenched so tightly around her champagne flute that I feared the stem would snap. Her face was a canvas of disbelief and fury, an artwork in real time. And I was still. Not triumphant. Not smug. Just still. Like the eye of the storm that had passed through every corridor of this house, washing away the lies and leaving behind only truth. The notary handed me a duplicate copy, stamped and witnessed. "It's done," Mira whispered. The press had caught it all. Every signature. Every sentence. Every truth. The headlines would write themselves by morning. Sebastian finally found his voice. "You can't do this," he stammered. "You're not well. Everyone knows." I cut him off with a look. "Just one. I may be old, Sebastian. But senility doesn't sign legal documents. Fraud, however, does." His lips moved, but no sound followed. I turned to the crowd again. My son and his wife orchestrated a scheme to strip me of everything: my home, my legacy, my life. Tonight, I take it back. And not just for me. For every woman who has been told she is past her prime. For every mother dismissed as a burden. For every widow turned invisible in her own story. Applause didn't come immediately. It came slowly, cautiously, like raindrops testing a roof. But it grew. Louder. Sharper. Stronger. Until the entire ballroom pulsed with the sound of truth breaking through marble walls. I stepped down from the podium. Vanessa moved to intercept me. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I leaned in close. Only people who lose regret. And I'm no longer the one losing. I walked out of the ballroom, cane in hand, shoulders straight, and legacy intact. They could keep the chandelier light. I had the thunder. I woke before dawn, not out of restlessness, but out of habit. Years of early mornings spent managing estate ledgers, charity appointments, and foundation calls had trained me well. Even in their attempt to break me, they never managed to dull that instinct. The house was quiet. No chatter in the kitchen. No Vanessa barking orders. No Sebastian stomping down the stairs with half-tied shoes and full arrogance. Just the ticking of clocks and the soft breath of a house returning to its rightful rhythm. I poured my own tea that morning. Not because there wasn't staff to do it, but because I wanted to feel the weight of the porcelain cup. To feel real. At exactly 7 a.m., the estate attorney arrived. A different one, mine. Handpicked by Bellamy. A woman named Alina Voss. Young, sharp, the kind of legal mind that saw through smoke and mirrors within a sentence. She reviewed the signed documents again, confirmed the press coverage, the official notarizations, and, most important, the financial hold on Sebastian's fraudulent accounts. By this time tomorrow, she said with cool efficiency, they won't be able to withdraw so much as £1 without triggering a criminal inquiry. I nodded. And the house? Yours. Every stone. Every pane of glass. Every clause upheld. I didn't ask about them, Sebastian and Vanessa. I didn't need to. They hadn't left yet. I'd heard the muffled shouting from their bedroom late into the night, followed by doors slamming and luggage wheels scraping the floorboards. They hadn't just lost an inheritance. They'd lost face. That's harder to recover. Still, I was not cruel. I sent word. They had 2 days to gather their things. No press interviews. No statements. No retaliation. And if they followed those terms, I'd let them leave with a fraction of what they still had. If not, well, the storm wasn't over. It was simply resting. I walked the halls that morning, hand tracing the old wainscoting, the oil paintings, the portraits of ancestors who once looked down on me with judgment, then concern, then silence. Now they watched with something closer to approval. I was Evelina Carrington, daughter of no one, widow of a legacy, mother of justice. And I was home again. They left in the rain. Not a grand exit, no drivers in uniform, no umbrella-bearing staff shielding them from the world they once ruled. Just 2 suitcases, an overstuffed handbag, and the unmistakable silence of people who had lost everything. I watched from the upstairs window, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I needed to see it, needed the finality, needed to know that the rot had been removed from the roots of this house. Sebastian didn't look up. Vanessa did. She met my gaze with the eyes of a woman not yet done. Not sorry, just wounded, furious, and vowing revenge in silence. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I held her stare until she looked away, face streaked with rain and mascara. She would try something. But I had prepared for that too. Alina had already alerted the press that any false statement or slander would be met with legal firepower they couldn't outrun. And thanks to Jonas's investigation, we now had leverage, records, tapes, timelines, weapons hidden in briefcases and legal filings. Still, I knew better than to believe in total peace. There's always a second act. But for now, they were gone. The staff gathered in the kitchen afterward. Noelle offered tea, and when I stepped in, they all stood, quietly, respectfully, unsure of the new order. I addressed them plainly. There will be no purges, no threats, no removals. If you stayed out of loyalty to the house, to this family, even when I was cast aside, then I thank you. And I hope you'll stay, because this home has been sick, and I intend to make it well again. Several nodded. A few wept. And as I turned to leave, Noelle gently touched my arm. It's good to have you back, ma'am. I smiled, not because it was good to be back, but because I had never truly left. I had only waited, and now I was done waiting. 3 days after their departure, I entered the East Gallery alone. This was once my favorite room, a cathedral of light and shadow where Richard and I curated the Carrington legacy in brushstrokes and canvas. But Vanessa had desecrated it. She'd removed our collection, replacing it with sterile, modern abstractions that screamed of ambition and nothingness. I stood in front of one such piece, just black paint splashed across white linen, framed in gold leaf, and felt no anger. Only emptiness. They had tried to erase history, so I decided to restore it. I summoned the house staff and opened the sealed storeroom beneath the west wing. Inside, preserved in linen and dust, was the heart of our family, portraits spanning generations. The Carrington patriarchs and matriarchs. Richard in his prime. And one they never dared to hang while Vanessa reigned over the walls mine. Painted when I was 62, the portrait was a gift from Richard. It captured me in a navy velvet gown, standing in this very gallery with a calm that bordered on fierce. At the time, I thought it made me look too severe. Now, I saw the truth in the artist's eye. I had always been severe. because kindness in this world often gets eaten alive. With Noelle's help, we rehung every portrait in the order they once were, adding mine to the end of the line, not as a final act, but as the beginning of a new era. When it was done, I invited the staff to view the room. They filed in one by one, maids, cooks, gardeners, even Mira and Jonas, and stood in reverent silence, as if attending a family funeral and resurrection at once. "I want this gallery reopened to the public," I said, "for the first time in 12 years. No one spoke. So I added softly, "Let them see what legacy really looks like." The room was still. And then, as if on cue, the storm outside finally broke, the clouds parted, and a beam of light filtered through the tall windows, catching the portrait's eyes just right. It looked like I was watching. Because I was. The West Hall had always been Richard's dominion. Long after his death, Sebastian claimed it as his office wing, renaming rooms, repurposing spaces, even placing a brass plaque outside the study door, "Carrington Financial Command." I had it removed. Not out of pettiness, but out of principle. This house was not a monument to a failed takeover. It was a living archive of everything we built, everything they tried to bury, and everything I now intended to protect. I walked the corridor slowly, hand grazing the carved mahogany wainscoting as I passed the doors. Behind each one were remnants of history, boxes of correspondence, contracts in Richard's handwriting, ledgers from my charity days, even the original blueprints for the estate expansion. Room by room, I restored what had been erased. The West Reading Room became a memorial library filled with not just Carrington history, but the voices of others who had been cast aside by their own kin and rose back stronger. Letters from widows, articles on matriarchs who fought empires, memoirs from women who outlived betrayal. I curated every page, because this fight had never been just mine. It was all of ours. I had a small brass plaque made, fixed to the door. "The Hall of Unforgotten Women." Some might call it melodrama. Let them, because every woman who crossed that threshold, every visitor, every daughter, every dismissed matron would know this place stood because I had not crumbled. Later that week, I received a letter. No stamp. Hand-delivered. From Vanessa. It was short. Bitter. "You may have won the house, the name, the press. But you've made enemies, Evelina. Dangerous ones. You should have stayed in your wing." I read it twice, then placed it in the fire. Not because I was afraid, but because I had already chosen a different battlefield. And on mine, she was already defeated. On the third Sunday of spring, the bell rang at the Carrington gates. Not the usual delivery driver or gallery applicant. Not press. Not lawyers. No advance notice. Just an old man in a navy coat, standing with his hat pressed to his chest and eyes full of memories. Noelle fetched me personally. He says he knew Mr. Richard. Says you'll recognize the name. The card simply read, Edmund Lorne. My breath caught. Edmund had once been Richard's closest friend. A quiet, brilliant man, part legal advisor, part guardian, part secret keeper. I hadn't seen him in over 15 years, not since Richard's funeral. He'd vanished after that, choosing silence over the shallow condolences that always follow grief. I met him at the foyer myself. He looked thinner, older, but his eyes still held that same perceptive glint. The kind of gaze that seemed to measure time itself. "I heard what you did," he said without preamble. "I came to say, Richard would have been proud." I led him to the sunroom. We sat over tea. He spoke little of the past, but enough for me to know he'd kept watch from afar. "I knew something was wrong," he murmured. "The day Sebastian changed the foundation trusteeship. I wanted to intervene, but I wasn't sure if you were still capable." I asked, one brow raised. He smiled faintly. "Still dangerous." That made me laugh. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. Inside was a single brass key. Ornate. Familiar. "This belonged to Richard," he said. "He left it with me in case the house ever needed cleansing." I stared at it. My fingers trembled as I took it. "The vault under the East Library," he said. "You know the one." I did. Few people knew it even existed. "What's inside?" I asked. He stood to leave. "Whatever you need to make the next move." Then he turned and walked out, coat flapping behind him like a closing chapter. I stared at the key long after he left. Because I had won the house. But Edmund had just given me something more dangerous than revenge. The final piece of the game. The key felt heavier than metal. It carried the weight of Richard's secrets, of his fears, and perhaps of a contingency he never dared speak aloud. That evening, after the staff had retired and the halls fell into that sacred hush, I made my way to the East Library. The library hadn't changed much. High ceilings, walnut shelves, a skylight that draped moonlight over the reading chairs. It was once a place of comfort. Vanessa had tried to turn it into a wine-tasting room. I had the nerve to laugh out loud when the design mock-ups were presented to me during her short-lived consultation phase. Beneath the center rug, under a false floorboard, lay a trapdoor few had ever noticed. I pried it open, the wood stiff with age, and climbed down the narrow stone steps, lantern in hand. The air turned cool and dry, silent. At the bottom, set into the far wall, was a brass lock. I inserted the key. It turned with a slow, satisfying click. The vault opened, and inside it was everything they'd been afraid I might find. Ledgers, dating back 30 years. Proof of every acquisition, every sale, every private deal Richard had hidden from board members and public filings. Not illegal, but powerful. Fuel for influence, leverage. Tapes, audio recordings. Conversations between Richard and some of the most powerful names in art, real estate, politics. Negotiations. Promises. Secrets whispered in confidence. And then at the very back, a leather-bound notebook. On the first page, written in Richard's neat hand, "If you're reading this, then you survived them. Good. Now make them remember who built this family, and why they should fear its name." I stood there in the lantern light for a long while, reading. Sebastian had always assumed Richard favored him, but Richard left this vault for me. Not to wield recklessly, but to protect the name we built together from the inside out. Upstairs, the storm had passed, the house quiet and clean. But down here, the war chest had been opened. And for the first time in years, I no longer feared what was coming. I welcomed it. News spreads faster than decay. By the end of the week, the headlines had shifted from cautious admiration to reverent fear. Not just matriarch reclaims estate or Carrington widow exposes family fraud, but something sharper, more reverberating. The woman who rewrote her ending. Investors withdrew from Sebastian's frozen accounts. Vanessa's exclusive PR firm dropped her after leaked footage surfaced of her humiliating an elder staff member, footage Jonas had been saving for just the right moment. Their names were whispered now, not celebrated. Pariahs in Versace. But I hadn't spoken to either of them since their departure. That silence was my final kindness. I shifted focus. With the materials from the vault, I established the Carrington Archive, a private trust containing not just art and estates, but recorded histories, family letters, and philanthropic blueprints Richard never made public. I made it transparent, accessible, powerful, but I also made it clear who controlled it. My portrait now hung in the estate's main hall, directly across from Richard's. We looked at each other across the polished floor. Two legacies intertwined, no longer twisted by ambition or betrayal. The symmetry was perfect. Then came the invitation. A formal, stiff letter sent by courier, embossed with gold trim and hollow regret. Sebastian and Vanessa requested a meeting. I studied it like one might study the final move on a chessboard that's already been won. They wanted to apologize, to discuss legacy and resolutions. I laughed, but I didn't tear it up. I tucked it into the back of Richard's notebook, under the line that read, "Make them remember." Because I would let them come. Not to restore, not to reconcile, but to see, with their own eyes, the empire they tried to erase standing taller than ever. To watch their reflections flicker in gilded mirrors that would never again show them as rulers, only as ruins. I hosted the meeting in the Red Salon. It was intentional. That room had once been Vanessa's vision project, all glass sculptures and chrome vases that never quite belonged in a house born of oak and legacy. I'd restored it, of course. Deep crimson walls, blackwood chairs, a fireplace that had burned through 5 generations. When they entered, it was as though the house itself rejected them. Vanessa, in head-to-toe designer desperation, surveyed the room with thinly veiled disgust. Sebastian followed, quiet, smaller than I remembered, like something had deflated within him. I was already seated, flanked by Alina and Jonas. Not for protection. For ceremony. Vanessa forced a smile. Evelina. I returned none of it. You may sit. They sat. And for a moment, there was only the fire crackling. Then Sebastian spoke. We've lost everything. That was true. He continued, I just wanted what father promised. I thought the estate, what your father promised, I interrupted, was that Carrington would never fall into the hands of those who lacked honor. He trusted me with that. And I kept that promise. Vanessa shifted forward. We came to offer an agreement. We walk away quietly, no press, no drama, and in return we ask for a minor trust. Something to help us start over. She placed a sheet of paper on the table. Typed. Precise. Ridiculous. I didn't touch it. Instead, I reached into my folder and slid out a single photograph, one of Vanessa, champagne glass in hand, laughing with a known fraudster at a private yacht auction 3 years ago. An event sponsored by Carrington Funds. Her face paled. Jonas slid a second folder across the table, an account ledger Sebastian never knew was recovered from the vault. It tied him to a string of shadow investments designed to cut me out before I ever knew. Sebastian tried to speak. I raised a hand. No one will press charges, I said calmly. I have no interest in trials. What I do have is something far more enduring. Narrative. And control. Alina leaned forward. You have 2 choices. Disappear and live small. Or try to rise again and watch us burn every bridge you step on. The fire popped loudly behind us as if in agreement. They didn't sign anything. They didn't cry. They just stood. And walked out. Quietly. As I watched them go, I realized something strange. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole. Because they had once taken everything. And now, they couldn't even take a chair at my table. The Carrington estate was never just a house. It was a living, breathing witness, one that had watched generations build, destroy, love, betray, and vanish. It remembered everything, even when others wanted to forget. And now it remembered me. Not the woman locked in her wing. Not the relic at the end of the hall. But Evelina Carrington, the architect of silence turned storm. Spring settled gently across the grounds. The roses bloomed again, thicker, redder. Noel said it was the richest bloom he'd seen in 10 years. I smiled and told him it's because the soil knows peace again. Inside, the house transformed. The gallery opened to the public for the first time in over a decade. People walked through the halls, whispering stories of resilience and history. Children traced their fingers along plaques bearing the names of women who had been erased from their own narratives and were now immortalized in gold leaf. The Carrington Archive launched to acclaim, not just as a museum of art, but as a monument to reclamation. Scholars visited. Journalists called it a resurrection of integrity. Others simply called it justice. And every day, I walked the halls not as a ghost, but as a guide. I wrote a final letter to Richard that spring. I placed it in the fireplace we once sat beside, sealed with the wax he used for love notes in the early years. You were wrong to leave the keys to them, but right to leave the map to me. I found my way back, not to what we had, but to something better. Love always, Evelina. I lit the letter, and the flame danced like a bow. That evening, as I sat on the veranda and watched the estate bathe in golden light, Mira asked me if I had any regrets. I looked at the house that had buried me and then raised me like a phoenix from its hearth, and said, no, because I didn't just get my life back. I rewrote it. Here the story ends. Thanks for watching. Hit like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more true tales and real stories.